Welcome to the Pacey Performance Podcast. Today, I'm speaking with Senior Physiologist at the Australian Institute of Sport, Shona Halson. This episode of the Pacey Performance Podcast is sponsored by Valve Performance, the team behind the NordBord hamstring testing system. So the NordBord is the fastest and easiest, most accurate way to measure hamstring strength in under 90 seconds. So the NordBord gives you the right information so you can make the right decisions for your players at the right time. So it's already in use by over half the Premier League and dozens of other elite teams around the world. So the NordBord testing system is on its way to becoming the gold standard for measuring and monitoring hamstring strength. So if you are interested in getting to know anything more about the NordBord, you can visit Vald Performance, that's VALD performance.com, to find out more. This episode of the Pacey Performance Podcast is sponsored by Train with Push, creators of the Push Band. So the Push Band is the first scientifically validated wearable device to provide objective insights into your performance in the gym. So using accelerometers and a gyroscope, the Push Band is able to use bar speed to regulate load and volume based on your ability in the gym on any given day. So you can use the Push Band to quickly establish 1 RMs with submaximal load so you can plan with confidence. So the Push Band portal also allows you to create programs before entering the gym to make change on the fly depending on how you are performing on that given day. So you can customize everything from target velocity ranges to differentiating velocities for warm-up and creating working sets and supersets for yourself or your athletes. So if you do want to know more about Train with Push and the Push Band, get yourself over to trainwithpush.com. They also got a great blog, so you can catch up with some guest bloggers such as Mladen Ivanovic and Dan Baker. So be sure to check them out at trainwithpush.com. Thanks for tuning in to episode 82 of the Pacey Performance Podcast. So today we've got Shona Halson coming from Queensland in Australia. So it fits the bill again for a very Aussie feel to the podcast recently, which has been great. So Shona kind of fills a real selfish agenda for me recently with my travelling to Australia. So it was great to get her on to discuss everything from minimising jet lag to compression garments to the use of electronic devices which are going to impact on sleep, the Fitbit, all different other bits of tech that have kind of come onto the market recently. So it was a really interesting chat with Shona, which I'm sure you'll enjoy. So again, like I said in previous podcasts, if you've got any feedback on this podcast or you want to recommend somebody to hear from in the next couple of weeks, just fire me a message on Twitter or email or whatever it may be, and I really appreciate that in advance. So enjoy the chat with Shona, and I'll speak to you soon. Hi guys, thanks for tuning in to the Pacey Performance Podcast. So today we've got Shona Halson, who is the Senior Physiologist at the Australian Institute of Sport. So welcome to the podcast, Shona.
Thanks, Robert.
So do you just want to give us a little bit of an introduction on yourself? So for anyone who hasn't heard of you, what you currently do in your background, your education, etc.
Yeah, sure. So my role, as you said, is Senior Physiologist at the AIS. So I've been with the AIS for a little over 13 years. So my role there is really around a combination of servicing and research. So the idea is that, we look after the athletes in terms of servicing and testing and those kinds of things, but also there's a fairly strong research component given the area that I work in, which is recovery, has sort of not had a lot of research in the, over the last sort of 10 to 20 years. So my role is really around recovery, things like sleep, compression, cryotherapy, hydrotherapy, those kinds of things.
So is that always been a kind of passion of yours?
Yeah, well, it was interesting because I actually did my PhD in overtraining in Birmingham in the UK.
Okay.
And so I was really interested in the fatigue side of things, but as I'm sure you know, fatigue and understanding fatigue and why people become overtrained is like the holy grail. And so then I ended up starting to look more at recovery. So, okay, maybe we can't understand fatigue on an individual basis as much as we'd like to, but maybe we can start to understand recovery. So it kind of meshed in nicely the link between the fatigue and the recovery.
So did you go on to work in the UK or just go straight back to Australia after your PhD?
I actually I went straight back to Australia. So it just happened that a job at the AIS was advertised just as I was submitting my thesis, and the the job title was Fatigue and Recovery Scientist.
Mm-hmm.
And these jobs just don't come up very often. So I applied for it, was lucky enough to get it, and was straight back to Australia.
Very good. So we had a little chat beforehand about my upcoming trip, which it's kind of weird because this will come out while I'm actually over there in Australia. But one thing that I wanted to kind of touch on from obviously a selfish personal point of view, but I think hopefully everyone will kind of find it interesting as well, is the situation with jet lag. Obviously, you guys, you've got a 6-hour flight to get to the side of the country. We've got a couple of hour drive, so it's not as much of an issue for kind of guys traveling around the UK, but there's obviously football clubs, rugby clubs who are playing in Europe, and obviously traveling all over the place. So I just wanted to kind of get your take on how we may minimize that jet lag.
Yeah, it's a really good question, and you're right. Australia is miles away from everyone else, so we generally do a fair bit of travel. Our athletes, do a lot of travel, especially this year, and travel to Rio was definitely interesting from Australia. So we have spent a fair bit of time and effort trying to understand jet lag and what we may or may not be able to do about it. So it is, there's not a whole lot of new things. A lot of the basic things that has been recommended for a long time still sort of holds true. So we kind of have a bit of a sort of a 3-phase approach. So the first one is what you do before you get on the plane. And we're actually pretty big believers in not getting on the plane excessively tired. So I know what a lot of people do is they think, I won't sleep the night before, or I'll go to bed really late, so then hopefully I'll sleep on the plane. Now, the small amount of research that we've done looking at sleep quality on a plane, it's very low, and most of our athletes are not flying business class. In fact, I would say all of them are not flying business class. So we know that when you actually sleep on the plane, the quality for most people is very low. So to have people excessively tired before they get on the plane, you can pretty much guarantee that when you get off the plane, you'll be, 3 times as tired. So what we say is be as well prepared and rested as you can be before you get on the plane. Now, we know that's not always possible with athletes because quite often they do extra training before they get on the plane because they know they're going to miss, 24 hours plus potentially of training. But trying to get on the plane in as good a state as possible. Then when you're on the plane doing, the usual things that are recommended, walking around when you're awake. There's a little bit of a debate now as to whether you sleep on the time zone, the destination of the time zone of the destination, or whether you sleep when your biological clock is ready to sleep. So, for example, Australia to UK or vice versa, as you're about to do, the optimal time when you should sleep to adjust to the destination's time zone might not match your body clock. So people say, well, should you sleep when your body's more ready to sleep? Or should you sleep on the destination's time zone? And I think that depends on whether your goal is to get over jet lag, or whether your goal is when you arrive to be as good as you can when you arrive. So that has implications for when you may be competing. But generally, trying to sleep, if you're trying to minimize jet lag, trying to sleep on the destination's time zone when you're on that flight. The basics like staying hydrated, wearing medical grade compression, walking around while you're not asleep. I'm really big on, I take my eye masks, my earplugs, my noise cancelling headphones to try to create my own little world away from all the other humans if possible. And so just doing all the things that you can do on a plane to kind of be as comfortable as you can. And then for us, the area that I guess we're spending most time now is around light and the timing of light exposure when you arrive. So we know that the body clock is in the brain, attached to the back of the eyes, and the best way to really get into sync with the new time zone is to get light timed at the right time and avoid light at the right time as well. So we write plans for our athletes on, okay, when you land between 2 and 4 in the afternoon is the best time to get light. Between 10 in the morning and 2 is the best time to avoid light. So we'll write some guidelines on them so that they can use light exposure to speed up the resynchronization process as much as possible.
So how are you timing that light, and why are you timing it at certain times?
Yeah, so it does depend on a few things. It depends on the direction of travel, the number of time zones crossed, etc. But there are ways of calculating when the optimal time of light exposure should be. There's actually a website and an app called Jet Lag Rooster that people can go to and type in your destination and how you're traveling, and that will give you information on when to get light and when to avoid light. So it's all based around basically your biological clock and jet lag, and when you should ideally trying to shift, because light has a very powerful role in melatonin. So it's all about trying to block melatonin or drive melatonin depending on the time of day. So with the calculations that you can do, you can optimize that light exposure or light avoidance. And there's ways on there, as I said, Jet Lag Rooster is one of the ways that people can go to calculate that.
Great information there. I'll be on it as soon as we finish. So you mentioned melatonin there. Is there any sort of supplementation that you recommend your athletes to be taking, either before, during, or after?
Yeah, look, melatonin's a really difficult one. I know a lot of people like it and find that it works, and a lot of people simply just take it an hour before they go to bed at their destination, and even sometimes before they leave. One of the problems, though, there's a couple of issues with melatonin in Australia. The only pharmacy grade you can get is prescription. So that does mean that if someone's going out and buying melatonin, it's usually from a health food shop or something like that, where you really can't guarantee the quality. So you can't get it over the counter. So there is a supplementation risk, an adverse doping risk. And the other thing is melatonin is really dependent on the timing of when you take it. So yes, a lot of people do find it effective just taking it 1 hour before they go to bed when they arrive, or even on the plane 1 hour before they would normally be going to bed in the destination's time zone. However, if you talk to classical sleep scientists and people that really are heavily involved in jet lag and travel, there is a bit of a concern around the timing of melatonin, because if you time it incorrectly, you can actually get it wrong. And some of the timing is all based around the lowest point of your core body temperature. And so it is possible to actually not use it correctly. And a lot of people do like melatonin as a sleep aid, so just using it normally. And the only issues around that are if you wake up in the middle of the night, if you've been traveling and you're jet lagged, you know what it's like. You wake up and it's 2 a.m. and you are ready to go, and you think, I'm not going to get through today if I do not go back to sleep. And so some people might want to take a melatonin then to help them back to sleep, but that timing of that melatonin could be very wrong in that instance. So it's all around the timing. It's all around trying to, obviously use it around bedtime as much as possible, but also being a little bit careful on the type of melatonin that you have and where you get it from. I know in America you can get pharmacy grade over the counter, but other places it's different.
So another thing you touched on there, which is which I want to discuss on a kind of broader sense, but with compression garments, what's the kind of, you say medical grade, how does that differ to what you may, like you say, buy in a sports shop or online or one of the popular brands?
Yeah. So the medical grade compression that we tend to recommend for travel, some of them may actually be quite similar to some of the garments that you buy from sport shops. But the thing about the medical grade compression is in Australia we call it TGA, Therapeutic Goods Association. So they've been approved as a means of helping to reduce deep vein thrombosis during travel. So, and we recommend a grade 2 or a class 2. Which means they've got a fair bit of pressure, but they don't have a super amount of pressure and compression, because you don't actually, if you have too much, you can actually cut off the circulation a little bit, not totally, but a little bit. And they also, one of the important things in it is they have the sock or the foot in it, and because what we often see sometimes with people who wear just any type of compression that might finish at the ankle is that if it's not fitted right, the ankle where the fabric finishes at the ankle can actually act like a tourniquet. So it can actually restrict blood flow. So that's why we like, when we recommend travel garments, that that they have the whole complete foot in it, so that you've got less risk of cutting off or restricting any circulation around the ankle. So we do recommend, if our athletes travel with compression socks, especially anything really over 2 to 3 hours. So if we're traveling across the country, or sometimes even a little bit across the country, then we recommend that they wear the medical grade compression.
Mm-hmm. If you were to kind of go off the shelf, is there any particular brand that you've come across that are very similar to the medical grade garments?
Yeah, so we have a research and development partnership with 2XU. They're an Australian company, but they're now available. They're available worldwide. They do make a travel sock, a recovery sock, and a performance sock. And the travel sock does have the full foot in it. It's quite a nice fabric as well. So that's one of the companies that we have the Research and Development Association with. But you can get medical grade compression from a lot of chemists and pharmacies, and often at airports as well. They will sell some kind of travel sock.
So how's that kind of technology developed over the last couple of years? Is it kind of come on, or are people pushing the boundaries when it comes to that kind of thing?
Yeah, I think when it comes to general compression, maybe not so much the travel compression. That's been around for a long time. It's sort of come from the venous insufficiency medical world anyway. So that's kind of been around for quite a while. But general compression, I think it is moving. I think there's now, there's been some research done now about wearing it, during performance versus recovery. And there's also now more of a kind of tailoring to different body types. So, for example, you look at swimmers, broad shoulders, no waist, long arms. That's a very different fit to, say, potentially a rugby league player, or rugby union player, or something like that. So I think now will be more the area for the future will be around making garments specific for athletes and different body types, and trying to optimize that pressure in different places. So making sure that the compression is around the muscle areas, etc., for different body types and body compositions as well.
Cool. So just to kind of move on to a bit more of the kind of sleep side of things.
Yep.
I just wanted to ask you about obviously the kind of emergence of activity trackers that are that seem to be everywhere, all over the TV and magazines and things, and just kind of get your take on them really, and what your kind of experience is of not just the kind of the technology itself, but athletes using them in the field.
Sure. No, that's a really good question. It's a really hot topic, because there are lots of different measuring devices that are coming out now. So I think the first thing that's most important is that any type of tracker, if you're not measuring brain activity, you cannot accurately 100% say whether you're in REM, non-REM, deep sleep, light sleep. And so you still see apps that say you've had this much deep sleep. And maybe there's some kind of correlation between movement. Well, there is a correlation between movement and the different different phases of sleep, but to really 100% be able to say whether you're in REM, non-REM, deep sleep, phase 1, 2, or 3, you really need to be measuring electrical activity of the brain. So that's the full polysomnography that you have in a sleep lab. So that's the first thing I always look at. The second thing is any tracker is only as good as its algorithm. Most accelerometers are pretty, an accelerometer is an accelerometer. I mean, yeah, there are slight differences, but the algorithms that they use to detect whether someone is awake or asleep is that's the big thing. That's the thing that will make it a good tracker or a bad tracker. And a lot of places or companies who have made these devices, for obvious reasons, aren't going to share their algorithms. And so, therefore, we don't really know how good they are or not. And so, unless they've really compared their tracker to polysomnography, so they've compared it to the gold standard, it's really difficult for us to be able to say, yeah, this is something that you should go out and use. Now, having said that, if the device is reliable and they're just looking, the athlete is just looking at change over time, and they're being reasonable about that change. So they're not going, oh, one night I slept this, my device is showing me I slept 2 hours, and freaking out, and then the next night, freaking out over something else. If they're understanding that it's a process and they're looking for big changes over time, well, maybe there's some educational benefit of tracking their own sleep. We certainly wouldn't use most of these devices, or we wouldn't use them for research purposes at all. You certainly wouldn't get anything published with the majority of the wearables that are out there. So I don't have a problem with athletes using, some of the more common examples, I say the Fitbit, they're pretty popular. So I don't have a major issue with athletes using that, as long as they understand that you're looking for, fairly big changes. Don't compare yourself to somebody else, which a lot of athletes do. They say, oh, how much sleep did you get and how much deep sleep did you get? But the other thing is the way that we approach sleep monitoring is we use sort of more scientific devices that have been compared to polysomnography. And we'll come in for a couple of weeks and we'll do a 2-week block of monitoring. We'll give them individual feedback and we'll sit down with the athlete and say, this is what was good about your sleep. This is what you could tweak to be a better sleeper. And then we'll kind of leave them alone for a little while because, and then we might do some follow-up down the track if we think they need it. But one of the things about sleep is that stress and anxiety are super closely related to sleep. So if you've got an athlete that's a bit obsessive, they're super interested in the data from their watch, they can look in the morning and go, wow, I only had 2 hours of deep sleep, which may be completely incorrect. And then think, oh, well, I'm not going to have a good training session today. Or go up to a coach and say, I'm not quite sure how well I'm going to go today. I'm pretty tired, didn't have a great sleep last night. So people can get obsessed about their sleep. And so that's where I have some concerns about athletes tracking their sleep with these devices all the time, especially when you have a device that may not be accurate. Mm-hmm. So I think there's a balance there between education, getting them thinking about sleep and having athletes understand that it's important, which is important in itself, and then making sure that they're not getting too obsessed over it and understanding that no one sleeps perfectly every night. It's okay to have the odd bad night here and there. That's just totally normal. Your performance is probably not going to be affected unless you have, 3 or 4 nights of pretty bad sleep. And even then, it's usually just your perception of effort that changes rather than your physiology. So don't get too hung up about it and don't get too obsessed about it, but know that for overall health, well-being and performance and, over a long period of time, you want to get as good and consistent sleep as possible.
So is there any devices out there that have been compared to the gold standard?
Yeah, there's a couple. We use the Philips Respironics watches. So they are around, I'm trying to think of what it would be in pounds, probably about £800 per watch, okay. Plus the software on top of that. That's Philips. There's also a company called Fatigue Science. They do mainly consultancy type work, so they're involved in the assessment and the analysis. Whereas the Philips, you just buy the watches, buy the software, and you're off. So they're kind of the main. There's a couple of others, but they're kind of the major ones that we've used in the past. And then obviously there's a lot of new devices coming out on the market a lot cheaper. But until we see sort of the published data on those and how they do compare, we definitely steer clear from a research perspective.
Mm-hmm. So kind of keeping on the tech and how it may affect you. It's something that's obviously talked about a lot just because of the way things are going with phones and what, the kind of things you can do, you can find things you can do on them. But what actual effect does that activity on your phone, not just straight before you sleep, but throughout the day? What could it do to you for your sleep?
Yeah, great question. And I think for a lot of the aged athletes that I deal with and that most people deal with, that it's a real issue. It's a real concern. So there's a few reasons why it can be a problem. It doesn't have to be a problem for people, but there's a few reasons why it can be a problem. So the first thing is, as I mentioned earlier, light is very important for shifting your body clock. So if you've got light from these devices, and so we're talking, computers, phones, iPads, things that are fairly close to the individual. A TV at 5 meters is not such an issue, but the devices that are very close. So that light actually stimulates the body clock and potentially can decrease the release of melatonin, because the light's saying, well, there's no, light is daytime. We're stimulating the body clock. Let's stay awake. So there's a potential direct effect of light. There's also the fact that most of the times that their athletes are on the phones, it's not just, reading, news websites. It's more than likely Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. And the problem with those things is that they're interactive. And so it means that for a lot of athletes, they may post something, and just doesn't go for athletes. This goes for, most people on social media. If you're going to post something, most people are like, oh, well, I wonder who's going to respond to that and what they'll say and how many likes I'm going to get and blah, blah, blah. So the problem with the social media is, for me, it's the interactive content of it. So if you're just screening through and having a look, yes, you're getting the light effects, but that's different to if you're posting something and potentially waiting for that kind of interaction. The other thing that happens when people are on their phones is it just steals time. And all of a sudden, it might be, you might go to bed at 9:30, and then next thing, you're looking at things, and next thing it's 11 o'clock at night, and it just takes away time. It's just when most athletes have to get up at a fairly normal time in the morning, not like morning times are often something that you can't be changed because of training times. The thing that you can influence is the time that you go to bed. And so, of course, if you're chewing up time on your phone, then that can also be a problem. So yeah, it's one of those things where we try to encourage athletes to take the phone out of the bedroom. If you're going to do your social media and those kinds of things in the lounge room, do it before you actually go into the bedroom. Hop in the bedroom, and that's the place for sleep. But most people use their phones as alarms. They don't want to put it on flight mode. They don't want to, be detached from it in any way, shape, or form. A lot of athletes actually leave their phones on, and that creates what we think is like an on-call effect. So if you think of, doctors who are on call and they have their phone on because they're just waiting because their phone may ring for an emergency, that's the same kind of thing. Athletes have their phones on just because people want to be connected. There's this FOMO, fear of missing out. So everyone wants to be connected. So it's kind of like the perfect storm when it comes to things that can influence sleep in a negative way.
Mm-hmm. So how does that, that's just kind of just before you go to bed, how can being in that kind of social media world hours before you go to bed, does that have a very similar effect to the kind of fear of missing out, the kind of anxiety of,
Yeah.
who's going to reply to my text or tweet or whatever it may be. Does that have a similar effect, throughout the day and being involved in that world?
We don't think so as much. It seems to be, they really talk about the power down hour. So lights low, technology away in the hour before you go to bed. Now, I know that most athletes are probably not going to do that. So I sort of say half an hour to an hour if they can, take the phone away. And especially around competition, at Olympic Games, when there's that much media, there's fans engaged, and it's obviously up to the sport how they decide to deal and manage that. But taking phones away, the night before a competition, and doesn't have to be taking phones away, just responsible use of it. So really, in that hour before you go to bed, need that kind of wind down time. And so it's like if you've had a massively stressful day and you come home from work and it's late and it's just been, busy, stressed day, and someone says, right, you need to go to bed straight away and fall asleep. You're not going to fall asleep straight away. You need that wind down time. And so it's like athletes after a competition or a late night game need that kind of downtime and that wind down time before they can sleep. And if you've got some stress associated with using your phone, you need to take that away as well.
Very interesting. So I just want to move on a little bit to kind of post-competition or post-training, and looking at cold water immersion, and just how the kind of maybe thinking's changed. Has thinking changed? Have things progressed with regards to that side of things for recovery?
Yeah, look, there has been over the years, I guess over the sort of 13 years that I've kind of been at the AIS, I've definitely seen there's a shift. However, I think it's, people want the black and white answer. It's like low carb, high carb. They just want, and it's never black and white. It's always grey. And so for me, it really does depend on the type of athlete that you're dealing with. So if you do look in the literature, there is, a couple of studies, a couple of them really quite good, that show that there may be a blunting of adaptation following strength training while using cold water immersion. Now, some of the, good papers, good people who've done the research, but some of the problems with it are the individuals training twice a week. Now, that's not what we deal with. If we're working with heavyweight rowers, sometimes they've got 3 sessions a day, on water, gym, on water, or on water erg gym session, and so it's very difficult for us to go, well, what that paper has shown in athletes who are training, or in individuals who are training twice a week, is very difficult for us. So there's really 2 sides to the story, and like I said, it's not black and white. But one side is, okay, maybe you can dampen adaptation, because don't you want, fatigue, and don't you want inflammation? Isn't that part of the overall adaptation supercompensation process? On the other hand, there is, well, if I'm an Olympic athlete and I'm training 2-3 times a day, I need to be able to get every single thing I can out of each of those sessions. Add that up over 4 years. Maybe I'm training more, maybe I'm doing more, maybe I'm adapting more because I'm less sore, I'm less tired, or maybe I'm just more efficient in my training, so I can do the same amount of training for less energy expenditure, whatever it is. So I think there's those kinds of 2 sides of the story, but I think it's also really important to consider what sort of athletes are you dealing with. If you're dealing with professional footballers who are playing every week, or if you look at, the case of soccer / football in the UK, maybe 3 times a week. These guys, you want to minimise their risk of injury. There's a whole lot of things that are going on. And so, for these guys in season, you probably want to throw as many recovery strategies at them as you can. If you're working with swimmers who don't have the impact or the contact, they're in a water medium, you can probably push these guys a little bit harder without recovery. So maybe in blocks where they're doing some of their base training, maybe you don't give them any recovery, but you throw it at them in competition, because I think the studies and the reviews around acute recovery are pretty strong. So from a day-to-day basis, they're pretty good if you do recovery right. The question now is over the longer term. So I think it's all about, yes, to me, in competition, recovery is a no-brainer. How you periodize it, like we periodize training and we periodize nutrition, comes down to the type of athlete that you're dealing with, when they're competing. Do they have muscle damage? Are they an athlete that's susceptible to injury? So there's a lot of things that I would think about before I said, oh, hang on, I read that paper and it says that cold water immersion is bad for recovery. We are probably a little bit more conservative than we were in the past, and if I was going to take recovery out of someone's program, it would probably be around strength training, just to be cautious. But then I think it's also really important to monitor the athletes, understand their subjective responses, how they're training, those kinds of things. So you can look back and you go, hang on, we took recovery out there and they slept worse and they were sore and they're more prone to injury. Or you can look back and go, hey, we took recovery out of that, and look, they actually went better they actually got better fitness gains in their base training block. So I think, it's very individual, and it really, there's no black and white, and we really need to monitor the athletes and understand them and understand on an individual basis as well, as to whether you give them recovery or you don't.
Mm-hmm. So you kind of touched on my next little point there, and that was, does cold water immersion kind of favour a certain method of training? So, for instance, strength training over tactical and technical work?
Yeah, really good question. And there's only been a couple of studies that have kind of looked at that. And Jo Vale, who was one of my PhD students a number of years ago now, she looked at that. So she compared different types of recovery after. So one was cycling, so 90 minutes of sprints in like interval training over 5 days. And for that particular study, cold water immersion was better than the contrast and better than hot water. Then she did another study with a lot of eccentric damage. So they were doing leg press and we had a winch, so that they were only doing the lowering section, which was pretty nasty. But in that case, the hot and cold, so the contrast water immersion was better. So, but that's really kind of the only work that's really been done there. But I think there's some benefits. So there's really, in an acute sense, cold water immersion can be really good for obviously dropping your core temperature. So, and we know that the body likes to, speeding up recovery if you've got a high core temperature is all around reducing that core temperature. Cold water immersion can also obviously influence, because it influences your body, your core temperature and your skin temperature, that may also influence your sleep, because we know sleep and core body temperature are linked. So there's other ways that potentially you can use a recovery and use cold water rather than just, immediately post-exercise for a, anti-inflammatory effect per se. So there's other ways that you could use it and time it. And there is a lot of athletes who do high intensity afternoon sessions, or higher sort of neural activity kind of sessions, do report that they like the cold water immersion, but there's not a lot of science to actually back that up.
Mm-hmm. Cool. So just one last thing before I let you go, and that was kind of tying nutrition into the whole, the last 35 minutes, and kind of linking that with its effect on sleep with regards to its timing, and its type, really.
Yeah. Yep. Look, that's a really good question, and we've just finished a big research project on it. Unfortunately, we haven't finished analysing the data, I can't share a lot of the information. But if you look at the existing literature, and it's not in athletes, it's just in the general population, but there has been a bit of work around trying to optimise either sleep onset, so helping people fall asleep quicker, and or sleep quality, so people sleeping better when they are asleep. And so there's things like tryptophan, different proteins. There's been some work to show that high GI carbohydrates can have a positive influence on sleep. And then there's certainly research out there on different types of herbal things. And so what we're trying to do now is come up with something that you can help sleep, but also maybe even help overnight recovery in terms of muscle repair. So there's not a huge amount of information out there, and a lot of the things that you can get at health food shops, they have the valerian and those kinds of products in it. But looking at things like, actually, if you look at milk. So just people say, have a glass of milk before you go to bed. It has, a pretty good amount of the proteins and the carbohydrates that you would need. And people often say warm glass of milk, especially if it's cold. If it's hot, so we're kind of used to in Australia more hot weather than cold weather. So we'd probably have a cold glass of milk. So sometimes the really simple things that the old wives' tales actually turn out to be true.
So is there anything regarding timing of nutrition with regards to sleep quality or sleep duration?
Yeah, look, there is a little bit of information around the high GI carbohydrates, and that can be around about the 4 hours before bed. But really it's such early days that it'd be very difficult to say hard and fast, this is what you should have and when. There's really obviously a balance between, you don't want to go to bed too hungry and you don't want to go to bed too full either, because that may just influence your comfort and have difficulties in sleeping. We do know as well that if you're trying to restrict your body, your intake, and you're trying to lose weight, then you don't want to have too much before you go to bed, too many calories before you go to bed. And we also know that a lot of athletes get up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom because they've just drunk too much before they go to bed. So, they've trained in the afternoon. They probably haven't drunk enough fluid or as much as they should have. So then they get home and they drink and end up, going to the bathroom all night. So while there's, certain studies out there that have shown, high GI carbohydrates 2 to 4 hours before bed, those things, we also have to incorporate that into the overall, what else are they eating? What's their intake like? What are their goals in terms of their body composition? And then overall, how might that influence their sleep?
Cool. Well, that's been really, really interesting. And I actually got a message the other day saying we really appreciate the Australian feel you've got to the podcast. So, Shona, you've just added to that Australian feel with another good Australian guest. So, thank you very much for that. Where can people keep up to date with what you've got going on? Are you on Twitter, Facebook?
Yep. I'm on Twitter. I'm just Shona Halson. Just me. Yep, I'm on Twitter. So yep, that's my main kind of social media, which I keep off before I go to bed, mind you. But that is my main form of interaction.
Needless to say. Okay, well, I'll let you go and just thank you again for getting up for me to have a chat. And we'll
enjoy your trip.
We'll keep in touch. I will enjoy my trip. Thank you very much. And I'll be listening back to this to get some information.
Like tips. Yeah, awesome.
Thank you very much,
Thanks,
Shona.
Robert.
Speak to you soon. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for tuning in to episode 82 of the Pacey Performance Podcast. So hope you enjoy the chat with Shona. And I just want to, before I let you go, say a massive thanks to both sponsors today, which are Val Performance, makers of the Nordboard, and Train with Push, makers of the Push Band. So I hope you got a lot from the episode with Shona. I definitely did, with kind of personal agenda on the cards at the time of recording. So I hope you enjoy the chat with Shona, and I'll speak to you soon.